Okay, I think we are live. Hello and welcome to Bigger and Better Data for Healthy CRM. I'm Ezra Kenigsberg. I'm the data architect for Salesforce.com's Midwestern customers. I've been with Salesforce.com almost 5 years now. I'll be presenting today with Ananth Sivakumar, who provides premier technical support for Salesforce.com's West Coast customers. In today's session, we're going to be presenting topics around and practices for improving your data. This session is intended primarily for our Group Edition and Professional Edition customers, but please know that you're welcome in this session no matter which version of Salesforce you're using. And yes, for all of you keeping score at home, between Ananth and I, your presenters have a total of 11 syllables in their names. Okay, as a publicly traded company, Salesforce.com has specific responsibilities regarding what we say, specifically any statements about the future. I don't care. I'm still predicting that the Saints are going to win the Super Bowl on February 7th. I encourage you to examine our safe harbor statement, which you can see here, and you can find on the web at salesforce.com. Okay, welcome to this presentation. I want to start by saying we all want cleaner and more comprehensive data. With every customer of Salesforce.com I've spoken to, and I've spoken to more than 100, there are some folks who are generally more happy. There are some folks who are generally less happy with the quality of their data, but I've never met anyone who felt there wasn't room for further improvement. So no matter how you feel about your current data set, I'm convinced that we can use this session to help you improve your data. Starting out, we're going to cover more abstract concepts like strategy and best practices for long-term success. As we move towards the concrete suggestions, we're going to demonstrate specific tools that you can use to start improving your data today. The most frequent thing I tell my customers about administering data is that it's an art, not a science. I encourage you to use what you like out of everything I show you. As a data administrator, I'm probably not interacting with people outside my organization. I'm going to be speaking to you throughout this presentation as a data admin. And so primarily my customers are internal users of Salesforce. They're end users. And I encourage you to think of your end users as customers. As customers, they're looking for a better deal. They want Salesforce to work better for them. As a data administrator, I have two routes to making my end users, my customers, happy. I can give them a more comprehensive data set, or I can capture better data on each record. In the category of more comprehensive data, I strive to root out hidden stores of data within my organization. I've seen that organizations that use Salesforce best are the ones where the executives are using it, and where those executives demand that the end users, my customers, use it too. They all put it the same way, which is that if it's not in Salesforce, it doesn't exist. So I encourage you to get your customers thinking about the if it's not in Salesforce, it doesn't exist mindset. When I find end users who are keeping their own silos of data, I encourage them to give me those paper notes or spreadsheets or databases so I can migrate them into Salesforce. In the Capture Better Data department, I keep track of the data being created in my organization by setting up reports and dashboards that are auto-sent to me regularly, and I encourage feedback from my end users, my customers, when they see bad or duplicated records in Salesforce. I encourage you to formalize a data strategy. It doesn't have to be some massive document. It could be a few bullet points and maybe a descriptive paragraph or two, but putting something down on paper is a vital step toward getting everyone to agree on what I've got to do as a data administrator. The first question a data strategy can answer is, what is my data? To that end, I might write a plain language description of the kind of data that my end users need, typically to support existing customers and to find prospective customers. I might list likely sources of data, be they people or departments within my organization, or third-party data providers, things like D&B and Hoovers. And I could describe how this data set may change as it grows over time. I encourage you to think about how your data looks right now and how you think it might look in the future. The second question a data strategy can answer is, how is my data maintained? Here, I encourage you to lay out a policy that talks about how data is entered. Can anybody enter it? Am I expected to clean newly entered records? And is it okay for me to retire records that haven't been touched in a long time? There are a whole bunch of different approaches to doing this. I encourage you to start thinking about what works for you ideally. And a third, underrated question is, who's responsible for that data? Notice I've put a bullet here for define your data org and the roles. One of the hugely underrated roles is the data steward. That's the knowledgeable person who knows what the data should look like and is authorized to fix data problems. In small organizations, and I think most of the people I'm talking to on this call are working in small Salesforce implementations, by default, you, the data administrator, you end up being the person who's also the data steward. That isn't necessarily best. Having somebody who knows the business well is often a better pick. And so if you can get that help and define a data steward, somebody who does some of the day-to-day work of selling or some of the day-to-day work of using Salesforce regularly, those people are frequently the best resources, a super user for serving as data steward. I try to document process in the data strategy doc as well. I think it's most important to clearly distinguish between the day-to-day routines and the one-off procedures. With the one-off procedures, I encourage you to ensure that each procedure has a clear beginning, middle, and end, because I'm going to make my customers, the end users, happiest when I clearly communicate to them what I'm going to be doing and when. Another useful item for a data strategy document is to figure out what technology is going to be used and how. In addition to Salesforce, I might have AppExchange offerings installed. We're going to take a look at AppExchange a little bit later. And I should define what functionality and data I might be working with, any current or planned integrations if I have anything. All of those elements should be fed into my data strategy document. A big bonus I've seen from creating a data strategy document, it helps me communicate to my managers just how demanding my job is, how much work I may be doing in my day-to-day job, and then on top of that, the administration of Salesforce that I'm doing. Okay, now I want to touch a bit on best practices. I'm going to talk about data migration best practices on this slide and cover dedupe and data cleansing on the next. First thing is, when it comes to migrating data, I want to establish what it is I've got and get my arms around some of these questions. Where is it coming from? Who's using it? What complicating factors like foreign languages or multiple currencies that I might encounter in loading it? Once I've learned what kind of data I'm dealing with, I need to make decisions about the data set. Does it all need to be migrated? If not all, then what rules should I use to eliminate unneeded records or fields? And is any of it going to be archived? The remaining points I want to talk about on this slide are all about establishing a repeatable, documented process to minimize the likelihood of errors. First and most important thing is before you do any customization, any modification of your org, I encourage you to back up all your data and also make sure you've got your entire configuration locked in. And also, I want to draw up a definite migration plan, likely including a test load, and definitely including some means of validating the data after I'm done. When it comes to cleaning records to improve overall data quality, the same basic mindset that I used in migrating applies. If I know I have a data problem, I want to define a process, analyze my data, and only then make changes. When it comes to deduplication, I strongly recommend determining what qualifies as a dupe before starting. Am I thinking I'm trying to get records that have accidentally been entered a second time? Or is there something more subtle going on? One problem I dealt with a recent customer was folks who had an awful lot of data in their system, and when I started deduping, they explained to me that it wasn't just duplicate records that they wanted to get rid of, but actually that they had too many low-level records in their data, and so they wanted to merge distinct physical locations together. Defining what a dupe is before you start can be very important. Once I've defined what qualifies as a dupe before I start, I might use a tough case to determine how I'm going to create duplicate rules. I might grab two records that look like dupes but aren't, or two records that don't look like dupes but are. Those will help me in crafting rules. Third, the fields I'm going to use, typically for accounts, I'll look at any unique identifier I have, like an account number. If I don't have an account number, I'll look at things like company name, phone number, and parts of addresses. The fields I use most often in parts of addresses are the street address, the city, and the zip code. And those can help me determine which I should use to drive matches. After figuring out which fields I'm going to use, I need to match the values within them. And this is the part where my methodology may differ depending on how I'm deduping. If I'm not going to be using a third-party app, I'm going to be somewhat limited in what I can do through Salesforce in conjunction with a tool like, say, Microsoft Excel. Using Excel, I have two primary methods. I can find and replace unhelpful characters like, say, parentheses, spaces, and dashes in a phone number. Or I can concatenate fields together to create cells that I can try to match against other records fields. Those are those two methods I see here, scrubbing and concatenating. If I'm using a third-party tool, I also have a few more abilities at our disposal. I'm just going to run through them quickly right now. One of them is the ability to standardize addresses. So if I'm using a third-party tool, I can apply address conventions like shortening street to ST every time, and it makes it easier to match address fields. Address lookup is great if I have a tool that lets me look up against a database of addresses. Fuzzy matching of fields, it leverages the ability of an application to make approximate matches between sets of strings. And then finally, with a third-party tool, I can automate the entire process by creating scores, which help me tell how close one record is to another. Okay, so I'm going to run very quickly through the data migration and data cleansing tools that we're going to look at today, and then we're going to get to our demos. For data migration, we're going to be using two basic tools. The first is the import wizard, which is the standard tool you'll probably use for bringing in data sets. Import wizard is capable of handling up to 50,000 records in a single upload, and it provides some simple capabilities for deduplication. Data loader, on the other hand, is much more sophisticated, and it's a full-featured application. It can handle any size data set. Notice that the 50,000 doesn't apply there. And it can migrate any type of Salesforce record. It can also be scheduled to run at set times. It can generate mapping files, and it can also export data. Data loader requires API access. So to enable data loader for your professional edition of instance of Salesforce, I need you to please speak with your account executive before activating the API access, and he can probably turn it on for you for a limited time. You can also purchase utilities off of AppExchange to help you migrate data. For data cleansing and deduplication, we're going to look at a set of free dashboards that we can download from AppExchange called the Data Quality Dashboards. We're also going to leverage functions within Salesforce, including inline editing, Salesforce's merge capability, and mass updates. When we do our data quality work, we're going to look at validation rules, required lists and pick lists, required fields and pick lists, and we're also going to take a very quick look, if we have time, at workflow and field updates. All right. Let's dive into the specifics of actually working with the data. First, Ananth and I are going to walk through a sample data migration, then some examples of migrating data, managing data, and then finally a deduplication. Okay, so for anybody who's been napping with the session sound muted, now would be the time to unmute if you want to catch the demo. Ananth, are you ready?
Thank you, Ezra. So let's focus on the first use case, which is the data migration. Here we're going to focus about migrating your accounts and contacts from any external database into Salesforce. The external database can be anything from an Outlook to your Goldmine or Act. And there are three steps which you mainly need to follow to get this data into Salesforce. The first one is exporting the data from the legacy system. The next one is preparing the data for import. It has to be on a CSV file format. And the last one is using the tools for importing. We are going to discuss import wizard or the data loader. As Ezra mentioned before, for using the data loader, you need API access. So let's get started.
Okay, the first thing Ananth's going to do here is he's going to come to his instance of Salesforce, and he's going to click on the Setup link. Underneath Setup, can you collapse your Customize list?
Sure.
Thanks. Under Setup, he's going to click on Data Management, and underneath Data Management, he's going to click on Import Accounts and Contacts. And this is the main screen for working with the Import Wizard. There's an awful lot of helpful links on this screen. We see FAQs at the right, and a sequence of steps for how you can prepare your files for import into Salesforce. In particular, I want to draw our attention to point number 2, which is help for exporting data from source systems like Act, Goldmine, and Outlook. All right. The next thing we're going to do, we're going to look at a CSV. In this example, Ananth has already made an extract of Outlook data as a CSV. CSVs are flat text files, which can be opened in a tool like Excel. And here we're looking at the data that Ananth exported. A couple things we want to focus on. Row 1 has headers in it. In a few cases, Ananth has changed the names of the headers for reasons that we'll see shortly. Notice here, too, that account information gets duplicated, repeated on multiple rows because we have more than one contact associated with a given account. I also want to show that on the right-hand edge of this table, we have 2 IDs that we created specifically. It's a best practice whenever you have unique identifiers to bring them into Salesforce. If your source system like Outlook or Goldmine or ACT doesn't have a unique identifier, I encourage you to make one. There are 2 schools of thought on what your identifier should look like. I'm a big fan of creating one from data within the record itself. So you can see here in cell AC2 that Ananth created a unique ID for his accounts based on the name of the account, concatenated, that is smooshed together with the street address. Looking at the contact IDs, he created a unique ID for each contact by taking that account information, the account name and the street address, and smushing that together with the name of the contact, him or herself. So we have those 2 unique IDs. We're going to see how those come into handy later.
Thank you, Ezra. So to start the import wizard, all you need to do is click on the step 5. This brings up the wizard. This is an 8-step process. From step 1 to 4 is going to be about the contact information, and step 5 to 8 is going to be about the account information. I'm clicking on next. Here you get to choose what file you're going to import. In this particular case, I'm going to do the account file with the contacts, which we spoke about before. For the criteria number 2, I'm just going to leave it to default value. And for matching type for both contacts and accounts, we will be using name. Please note that if your file is either corrupted or if it's not of a CSV format, you will not reach step 3. As Ezra covered before, I had modified the names of these column headers so that they can be appropriately reflected upon the wizard. In this case, as you can notice, it's far easier for me to go forward because it's automatically mapped. In this particular case, if I could go ahead and show you, for instance, yes, here, the billing street. You can see there is around 29 columns, and it would have been pretty tiresome to just go through each one of them one at a time. So it's much better if you had formatted the file accordingly, and the import would have gone through without an issue.
Okay, if I had set up my mappings here, can you go back one screen?
Sure.
If I had set up my mappings here, do I have the capability of saving them?
No, unfortunately, with the import wizard, it is not possible to save your mapping. But you can do that using the data loader, and we will cover that at a later time. If you go on to step 7, right before the import, it will tell you what field you did not map to. This is a good thing because just before import, you get an option to make sure that all the fields are in order, and then you can get the import right in. If you do not do that, what would happen is that data would have not got into the system. So in this case, it's the other phone, which I'm going ahead and mapping it right now. And we're going to go click next and next. And we're going to click next to start the import.
Got it. So we see here that it didn't warn us that there were mismaps or missing maps.
Right. And now we came across 2 errors. One is the invalid email address. This is because Salesforce emails have a certain format you need to import them in. It's like x@y.com or x@y.z. Could be any domains, but it has to be in the particular format. In the case of the import wizard, it actually displays the error, imports the record without that email address. And in the case of data loader, that would not happen. We will see that later. The next error is about the record owner field. For contacts, if you look at step 3, you can actually choose who can own the records. In my particular case, I've decided that I'm going to own all my records, so I did not map that.
Okay, so just before we move ahead here, just to emphasize, this is interface which the import wizard is walking us through that we're going to see the data loader doesn't do. The import wizard is helping us out by pointing out some potential problems.
Yes, the import wizard is more designed and keeping in terms of the end user in mind, and the data loader is more of an admin tool. And you will see that as we go through the demo further. So I'm going to click on import now. And there is two places where you can see the status of the import. One is the import queue, which will tell you all the records which have been used, how many records there were, and what's the status of it. For now, it's showing pending. And the other is that the import wizard also sends an email upon completion of the import, and that gives us an idea as to what the status of the records are as well. So right now, we're going to wait for this to be completed, and it is done. So here we go. We have got an email. And here you can see that there were 9 accounts which are created, but 19 contacts which are created. One may ask, why were there not 19 accounts created? The reason being the import wizard has a dedupe feature, due to which it sees the account name as being unique, and it just creates the first one, and the contacts related to the subsequent accounts get attached to it. So that's a good feature for dedupe. To see how the import came, what I do is I have my own list views which I've created, which will display all the accounts which were created right now. Similarly for contacts, if you go here, you can also see all the contacts which are created today. So this is the way you can see how your imports was.
Can we come back to the presentation?
Sure, hang on.
What Ananth is going to do now that we've walked through the process of migrating data in using the import wizard is we're going to do the same process using the Apex data loader. As Ananth mentioned, the import wizard is meant more specifically as an end-user-friendly application for bringing data into Salesforce, while the data loader is more intended for your hairy-knuckled technician types. We have a lot more power with the Apex data loader. We can bring in any kind of data with the data loader, whereas the import wizard is somewhat limited in which kinds of records you can bring in. We also get a lot of control over how data is specifically handled with the data loader. That's done somewhat at the cost of the error messages, in that with import wizard, we saw how once Ananth had chosen fields and said, I want to continue, it said, oh, wait, I haven't seen you map this field, or I don't think that this email address is going to import correctly. Those kinds of things, those safeguards are not going to be available to us when we import with the Apex data loader. So I encourage you to think when you're bringing in data sets, not only of which tool is available to you. You should have both once you turn on API access, but also to think about whether you're comfortable with the technician's tool, which is providing fewer safeguards, or if you want to keep the safeguards that you get with the import wizard. Okay, so Ananth, do we have the org cleared out?
Yes, we do. So to do the import using the data loader, and I'm going to walk you through the steps which we can do. So this is the data loader, and this is available only if you have API access, as Ezra mentioned before. For users who do not have this, you will have to work with your account executive to get this access. So here we're going to do an upsert for accounts and then contacts.
One of the phenomena that we're seeing here is that instead of being able to upload both accounts and contacts in the same single load, Ananth has to go one at a time. He has to load first the accounts and then the contacts. What we're going to do as an illustrative point is we're going to load the exact same file that we loaded in the import wizard into the accounts object using the Apex data loader. I've asked Ananth to set up 3 folders that you can see there. As a data best practice, I encourage you when using the data loader to create an individual file, an individual folder for each data action that you perform. You can see the naming scheme that we use there. Actually, can you come back to browse for a moment? And let's go up one level, please. We can see in the case of those 3 folders that I've named them with the year, month, and day. which makes it so that they sort chronologically when I sort them alphabetically, and I've put an index after each date stamp to indicate which action I performed. So the first action that we did was the delete that Ananth just did behind the scenes for us. And then he did, then we are now going to do the upsert of accounts, and shortly we're going to do an upsert of contacts. So Ananth's chosen the file, and now he's going to move on through the data loader wizard. He selected the object. Now he's going to select the external key. This is that index field that I talked about before that's so critical for helping match up records. We're going to skip this page just for the moment. I'll talk about it in a moment when we're doing our contact upload. Then, very much like what we did in the import wizard, we're having a field mapping screen that we can use to match fields in my file with fields in Salesforce. What I see at the top are the fields in Salesforce, and what I see in the bottom are the fields in the file. And I can match them to each other by clicking and dragging, or as Ananth did right when he came to the screen, he clicked Auto Match, and all those fields that matched up were automatically aligned to one another.
Thank you, Ezra. So I'm just taking a quick look to see if there's any fields I missed. As you can see, the file has both account and contact information. So I made the names, the field names to match the account information and contact information specifically so that it's easier for me when I'm doing the upsert.
Okay, so what we can see here is that the contact fields don't match yet because we're strictly mapping account fields at this moment.
Yes. Now, we have to click on OK, and you can choose to save the mapping. If you click on Save Mapping, you have an option to save the mapping. Unlike the Import Wizard where you cannot do that, here you can do this. So you click on Next, and then you can choose as to where you want to save the success and error files. As Ezra mentioned before, we're following the naming convention, and it makes it easier for us to track the different files and the versions which got through. So in order to complete this upsert, I'm going to click on Finish and see what happens. Oh no, what happened? We got 19 errors. So let's go ahead and look at the errors. Now, there's two places where you can see the errors. One is if you notice here, the success and error files appear in the folder automatically. At the same time, you can actually click here to choose to see what file it is. The error talks about duplicate external ID being specified twice. What's going on?
Well, I'm so glad you asked. What we're seeing here, can you bring up the file again, please?
Sure. I'll open up the original file so that we have better way of seeing it.
Thank you. So what we can see here is that the error says that we had a duplicate external ID specified. Unlike what we saw when we loaded through the import wizard, the data loader isn't going to go that extra mile and help us load the data by deduping automatically. Instead, what it says is it sees a problem. If I look at row 2, if I look at row, is that 11?
Yes.
Yes, row 11. If I look at row 20, I'll see that I'm inserting the same account in each of those cases. And the data loader is telling me, whoa, I don't expect to see 3 distinct records come in with the same exact ID. And so it pushed back on all 3 of those. No records were added. So what we're going to do to fix this problem is instead modify the file that we were given so that we're giving it an import file that doesn't have any duplicated records in it. Can you show the file we created?
Yes. Fortunately, I had prepared a duplicate version, another version of the file with just the unique account names so that we do not have this problem for our demo. So let me go ahead and upsert this the other file, which is the modified version. I'm going to click on Next. We are doing the same thing as we did the last time, matching up on the external ID. We're going to skip on step 2B. This will be covered in detail when we do the contacts upsert, which we'll be doing shortly. We'll do the auto match, and then just to ensure that all the fields get in, I'm just putting it here. It looks good. So let's proceed further. You get to choose where you want the success and error files. I've chosen the appropriate folder following the naming convention. And let's see what happens. Oh, all the accounts were successfully inserted.
All right. Okay.
So the next step involves upserting our contact information. So let's go ahead and get started with that. And here I'm going to choose the contact file, which is exactly the same as the import wizard.
Exactly the same as the file you gave to the import wizard.
Exactly. Thank you. And now for the external ID for the contact, I'm just going to choose the contact ID. And in step 2B, where you get to choose the account information, I'm just pointing it to the account external ID.
Okay, so let's take a moment to review this. Can you go back one screen?
Sure.
Okay, so what we're looking at here is what's going to be the unique identifier for the individual contact records. That's what we specify in step 2A of the data loader. What we're specifying in step 2B of the data loader wizard is how we want to match those contacts to external records. And specifically what we're going to do here is we're going to choose the account ID. So we are saying I want to connect my contacts to accounts using the account ID. The advantage of this approach is it means I don't need to know the ID that Salesforce assigned to my accounts. I can say, look, I have a means of identifying accounts uniquely. Salesforce, I want you to use that unique identifier.
So we map the account information. Let's click on Create and Edit and auto-match the columns. And I'm just going to do a quick check to see if all the fields are there. I'm just going to populate this one here. Click OK. It's similar to the last time. But now I choose the folder for the contacts because we are now upserting the contacts. Click OK. There was an error. I wonder why. The email again. So now you can see that this time it errored because of the inaccurate email address. So in the terms of in case of import wizard, the data would have gotten without the email address, but in our case, the record was not even created.
Okay, so the import wizard would have brought in the record without the email address. In the case of the data loader, the loader refused to bring in the record at all.
So this information can now be seen if I just go back to my list views, the one which I just showed previously, and all the information is there. That concludes our first demo. Moving on to the next demo. This is about data management. There are three portions we want to focus on. One is analyzing the existing data quality, cleansing the bad data, and the last one is protecting from any further corruption. There are tools both in the App Exchange and within the Salesforce application which we can do to achieve each one of these interests. For instance, let me show you about the Data Analysis App Exchange application.
Awesome. What we're going to do now, we're going to jump back to a browser, and we're going to navigate to appexchange.com. Can you click on the home page in the upper left?
Sure.
So when we first navigate to appexchange.com, this is the splash screen we're presented with. It tells us about some of the applications that are available to us that we can install in our Salesforce instance. Specifically, we're going to search on data quality, and when we do that, we see that our first hit is for the data quality analysis dashboards. This is a free application offered by Salesforce that I can install into my instance of Salesforce to help me analyze data quality. You would click the Get It Now step at this point. I'm going to have us skip that. It takes about 5 or 10 minutes to get set up. I'd rather we just facilitate that, the Julia Child, here's the ready chicken approach, by looking at an instance that already has that application installed.
I would like to bring a notice that in order to install this application, you would be needing marketing licenses because campaign object is something which is required for this application.
Okay, we'll talk a little bit about the developerforce.com developer instances that you can install for free. Let's move on with the demo of the data quality analysis dashboards right now.
Yes. So there are 4 different dashboards which come as a part of this package. The first one, which I'm viewing right now, is about the accounts, contact, and opportunity data quality. We have the campaign leads and activity data quality, and we have cases, contracts, and the last one is the high-level data analysis dashboard. Moving on to the first one, which is the account, contact, and opportunity data quality, this is a dashboard which has 3 separate columns, one having accounts, one having contact, and one having opportunity. Clicking onto this dashboard, which is tied up to a report, you can see that it is bringing the information off a data quality score. Let's go ahead and see what that field is. So if I click on Setup and I go under Customize for accounts, I can go ahead and check a field and see there is something called Data Quality Score. This is a formula field.
Okay, so the dashboard, the report, and the field that we've just looked at were all installed when we installed the data quality analysis dashboards from the App Exchange. And what's terrific about these fields is you're free to use them and edit them as you see fit. So for instance, if you were to say, well, I don't use phone numbers in my org very much, and so I don't want to gauge my data quality based on that, I could pull out that clause within this formula and put in something that makes more sense to me.
This is very useful because certain organizations have different measuring ways, and this would fit according to their business process. If you go to this dashboard now, just looking at the data, here you can see the number of records, and it shows, like, for instance, 33 records are missing the complete address, and 15 records are missing the rating. And so this gives a high-level idea as to how complete your data is and how good the quality is.
Okay, so we have some idea. Can we look at how we could edit some of these records directly within Salesforce now?
Yes. Using your bad data. So I'm going to show here the features of inline editing and using pick lists. So
we're coming back into our org now. And Ananth's showing us that when he goes to a particular list view, that he has his data listed out in this fashion. If you don't have this capability, what you want to do is go to the setup link, and then once you collapse your accounts, underneath Customize, you want to click on User Interface and turn on these 2 checkboxes that you see right here. One says Enable Inline Editing, and the other says Enable Enhanced Lists. By turning both of those on and hitting Save, you're going to enable the rich editing features that Ananth is showing us here.
yes, so in order to do this demo, I'm going to our contacts page, and when admins have multiple contacts and they want to update, for instance, the state of these, the state of these contacts together, the simple way to do it would be to check those records where you want to do the update and just click on the state field. I'm going to say all these contacts move to New York. And here I get the option to either choose for that particular record or all of them. I click Save, and there you go. All these records are saved automatically without me having to go through each one of these records individually. This can save a ton of time when you're doing such edits. The next one I want to talk about is running the good way is also running a report, which could go ahead and display all your accounts and contacts. Now, this report shows all your data. You can export this report as a CSV file, and using the native Excel functions, you can format the data and do other modifications accordingly. Once you're done with that, using our import wizard, you can do the import of the data and update it the same way.
Okay, so if I'm understanding you right, what we're doing is we could make a customized view, and we can edit individual data items, or we could modify multiple data items, or we could create a report like you're doing here, export it, and then after we've modified it, re-import it into Salesforce using the import wizard. An important point I want to emphasize here is that Ananth took the trouble to make sure to bring the Salesforce native IDs or to add the Salesforce native IDs to the report. The reason he did that is because it enables us, when we're re-importing that data, to match based on the Salesforce.com IDs. By matching on those, we're going to guarantee that we don't accidentally create more dupes.
Yes, so this would be a direct update rather than you don't have to worry about creating duplicate records. So that is another way of maintaining your data quality. And you can also use pick lists. The reason being, a lot of users have a tendency to make mistakes and mistype information. If you force them to start using pick lists, as in this instance, you could see, like, for instance, employer name or something, then industry. You can go ahead and make them, or the employer size, you can make sure that they put in the actual data and pick the values from the pick list as opposed to entering in to avoid this.
Okay. I notice here you've also set up dependent pick lists so that if I choose employer size, I can then choose the number of workers after that.
Yes. Okay. So, for instance, in this one, if it's a large employer, you have you can choose what the employee size is, which is anywhere from 2,000 to 5,000, and then the small ones is anywhere from 500 to 1,000.
Okay.
So this way you can ensure that the data is being cleaned up and it's protected.
Can you give us a quick look at data validation, and then let's move on to the next demo, please?
Sure. So the last part of the data is protecting it. This demo is protecting it. So in this case, for accounts, I've gone ahead and created these validation rules. A quick note, a validation rule helps improve the data quality and protect it by ensuring that the users do not save bad data. A way to get started is using the quick tips. If you click on this, it's a video. You can also see sample useful validation rules. And my validation rules, which I've created right now, is actually based off the rules I picked up from here.
Why don't we just show this quickly in practice and then move on?
Yeah, I'm just going to show one quick one, which is the billing zip code. If I go to any accounts now, and if I go ahead and try to modify the zip code and put in like an extra number, it's not going to save because the zip code must be in the correct format. So this is a good way of ensuring that the data is in the correct format. Moving on to our last part of the demo, which is the data deduping. Ezra covered in great detail as to what constitutes a dupe and the problems associated with it. We have existing features to prevent these dupes from happening. I would like to tie it back to our earlier import visit and our data loader options, which you've done before. The import visit reason being, once you do the import, you always get an email which tells you how many records we created. It has a native dedupe option. So this is one great tool which can ensure that the dupes are not there. Also, the data loader, which we had done before, actually just prevents the records from being created at all. You can see by these error messages which we got earlier. So these are the two native functions which we have already gone through. The last one which I want to focus on is just the merge feature. So if you go into accounts, under tools, we have an option of choosing the merge accounts option. In this case, I am going to go ahead and choose Acme, which is my demo account I've used for this particular case. There are two accounts, Acme, which are exactly nearly the same, so I believe they should be a single record. Now,
well, one quick thing before we move on here. I'd like to point out that you did a search on Acme. If you had other records that were Acme Industries or Acme Corporation or Acme what have you, those would have appeared in this list as well, and we would have had the option of choosing none, some, or all of those before moving on to the next step of merging.
Yes, and just to quickly point out, both these Acmes have their own contacts, and they are different accounts.
We see that there were 3 total contacts on our 2 Acme records.
Yes, and there's 5.
5, excuse me.
Yeah, that's so now we are going to go ahead and click on Next, and you can choose which one is the master record, and you can selectively choose information from the other records to make the master file. In this case, I'm just choosing at random. I believe that the ID should be this one and that this address is more correct. So I'm just going to click on Merge. It gives you this pop-up. And there you go. It creates a single account with all those 5 contacts, and it combines both the information together as a single record. This concludes our demo on the dedupe, and that concludes all our demos. So, Ezra, thank you.
Thank you very much, Ananth. Okay, so what I'd just like to recap here before we go into Q&A is that I encourage you to strive both to improve the quantity and quality of your data. If you put good data management in place, it's possible to do both well. The best way to nail down your data management is to put things to paper. I encourage you to create a data strategy and in it document what, how, and who, what your data is, how you're working with it, who's responsible for it. As far as data best practices goes, they can be pretty well encapsulated by measure twice, cut once, and have a plan going in. So follow best practices. Where your time and budget allows, I encourage you to get comfortable with other tools for working with Salesforce data. The free tools that we've talked about during this session are the Import Wizard and Excel. The Apex Data Loader is also free. It does require API access. And I encourage you also to reach out for help. Not only does every page in Salesforce have a help and training link behind it, but you can also submit tickets within your org or call Salesforce support. Before we hit the Q&A, everyone who's attended today has received a 10% discount for a quick start data migration. We'll be sending out further details early next week. And with that, I just want to let you know that the recording of this webinar will be made available by February 3rd. And if you have needs for further help, you can go to the 3 resources I mentioned, as well as going to Data Management Best Practices, which you can find by navigating to xrl.us/data best practices, or using any of the other resources. Let's jump to Q&A.
So we got the first question we have is, what is the difference between import my accounts and contacts and import accounts and contacts? I believe this user is referring to this section where you have import my accounts and contacts here and import accounts and contacts. So the difference is that for this, it automatically assumes that you are the record owner. In the case of the import accounts and contacts, you get to assign record owners for the contacts. That's a big difference between both of them.
Okay, so that the one that we saw above, which was under, show it to me again.
We see under setup and then import my accounts and contacts.
That's very much meant for me as an end user,
right.
Whereas the one I saw below, that's meant for data administrators.
Right, that is correct.
Okay, cool. Do we have another question we can use? A question I see here says, does it ever make sense to use the data loader for smaller data imports? That's a great question. As I mentioned earlier in the presentation, data loader is capable of handling data loads over 50,000 records, but you don't have to use it strictly for those size loads. If you have installed the data loader and you feel comfortable with it, I encourage you to go ahead and use it. Just remember that some of the functionality you get with the import wizard, specifically around deduplication, isn't going to be natively available to you. So it's a good idea to set up an external key field to leverage.
We have another question here. I have Premier support. Does that give me a full data migration service? We wish. Unfortunately, data migration is a pretty complex process. So as a Premier support rep, we would upload the files for you as long as you give us the files formatted correctly. We would not be touching your data, as it would, data manipulation is something which the customer should be doing and not as a support.
Okay, so basically we're happy to help you, but we don't want to be making or calling the shots as far as how your data should be configured within your app. Okay. Let's see. What exactly is the difference between an insert and an upsert? Oh, that's a great question. Insert is specifically about creating new records in Salesforce. I cannot modify any existing records when I do an insert. Upsert is, as the name suggests, it's a weird combination of both updating and inserting. I'm required to specify some sort of a key that I'm using. Typically, I'm going to use an external key. And what the data loader will do when I perform an upsert is it will match to that external key. If it finds an external key, it will perform an date on that record. If it doesn't find a match for that key, it will perform an insert. So the upsert is a combination of both insert and update. Okay, looking at this bottom one here, I see, do you recommend that we change the column headings to match the import wizard field? Yes, I do recommend that. I think it's a good practice to get into. As we saw when Ananth went through his import wizard steps, it automatically matched what we had 29 fields, and I would say about 25 or 26 of them automatically matched to the ones that we saw in the import wizard. Why don't we go ahead and come back to the import wizard? We can look at that right now.
Sure. Let me go ahead and pull this up real quick. So if I go ahead and click on, again, going through the process, if you click on Import Accounts and Contacts, after choosing the file, as you can see, from step 3 to 8, it's all accounts and contacts. You have tons of fields. It takes a long time to just go ahead and start assigning them individually. So it makes a lot more sense when you have these fields mapped automatically and created the correct way. Trust me, when you're dealing with tons of data, this would save a lot of time.
Okay. Another question I see here, we were asked, is the Apex data loader available for Professional Edition? I didn't think it was available. It's a good question. Data loader needs API access. It does not specifically need to be used with any particular edition of Salesforce. It just needs that you have API access turned on. So for many of the folks on this call, you're using Professional Edition. You can get in touch with your account executive to have them turn on API access for you. We don't typically offer that API access be turned on permanently, but we can offer it for a limited period of time while you're doing data migration or data uploads. So I encourage you to reach out to your account executive and ask them to turn on API access for you.
The API access can also be purchased at an additional price, and I do know certain customers who do that. The larger customers of Professional Edition tend to purchase the option so that they can use the data loader.
Okay, so if I were doing a one-time migration, I might be able to turn on API access for that. If I were doing repeating migrations, if I had an integration set up, I would need to pay an additional price to have API access kept on.
Yes, that is correct.
Got it. Okay, I'm going to take one more question here. Ooh, wow. All right, the question reads, 150 out of the 8,000 clients who, 150 out of my 8,000 clients attended a webinar recently. I'd like to use the import feature to place a note on the 150 contacts who attended. How do I do this without creating duplicates? That's a great question. You could do it with the import wizard. The problem is if you haven't set up an external key already, you run the risk of creating more records. I would suggest you might want to go through the inline editing and enhanced list views that we did before. So what I would suggest here, can we go to the Contacts tab, please? And let's create a new view in this case. So the question, the asker was saying that they've got 150 contacts that they want to single out and then modify. So what I would suggest here is we could name this something like folks who attended latest webinar. And then what I can do is filter out of my 8,000 contacts the 150 who specifically attended that conference. So I'm going to assume for the moment it was, why don't we say everybody who was in a certain state. Did you choose, why don't we go with the mailing state? Top of the list. Awesome. So we're going to say it's everybody who is in New York, or let's make it fancy. We could put a comma and then another value. California? I don't know. So this was my coastal webinar. Great. And so now let's scroll down. And what I'm going to do is make sure that I add the field that I want to modify to my view here. So for instance, let's say it was, what's going to be a good field that we could use to represent? How about, let's find a good example here. Oh, lead source. That's a great idea. All right, so we're adding lead source here and save it. And so now in this list, I see all of my contacts who are specifically in New York or California, and there's my lead source column. So I can click the checkbox in the upper left-hand corner. Can you click the one in the upper left, please? So if I were showing all 150 of them here, and actually, can you click the drop-down there? I want to show. We can show up to 200 records on a page. So we could have all 150 of my contacts shown right here. Then what I can do is by clicking that checkbox in the upper left, we can select them all, then change the value in lead source, or I think in the case of the question we got here, it would be something like a value we want to put in a pick list, something like that. Or in a custom field. We can change the value here and then hit all 12 selected records and hit save. And it's going to update them for all the records. Okay, how are we doing on time? Do we have one for one more? No? Okay, I think we're just about wrapped up. That concludes it for now. Can you come back to the last tip slide, please? So I encourage folks to check out the on-demand recording of the webinar once it's made available, to use the additional resources shown on this page, and have a wonderful day. All right, thanks a lot.
Thank you.